February 1945. In a palace near the Black Sea, 3 signatures turned prisoners into a promise. The sentence was clean. Liberated prisoners were to be returned without delay. On paper, it sounded like mercy. In the mud of Eastern Europe, it became inventory. Because one of the armies doing the liberating had already learned how to make a promise disappear without breaking it. This is a dramatized composite from that narrow, ugly space between alliance and rivalry, when the Second World War was ending and the next war was learning how to speak. By the winter of 1945, German prison camps were opening from the east like rotten doors. British men captured years earlier. Frenchmen taken in 1940. American soldiers dragged out of the Ardennes. Out of Italy, out of North Africa. They had survived frozen marches, dysentery, lice, and guards who counted them like sacks of grain. Then the Soviet columns arrived, tanks with red stars, trucks full of tired infantry, officers with clipboards and cigarettes and polite English phrases. The prisoners expected food, medical checks, and a road west. Instead, many of them heard the same word over and over: processing. Processing meant their names were copied. Processing meant their letters were collected. Processing meant the gate stayed locked. And processing had one special advantage: it sounded temporary. Colonel Daniel Keene did not understand that at first. He was not a colonel then. He was a staff sergeant from Pittsburgh, 31 years old, with frostbite in 2 toes and a habit of counting everything when he was frightened: fence posts, guard changes, truck engines, loaves of bread. He had been captured during the German winter offensive and moved from one camp to another until even the Germans seemed unsure where to keep him. On March 2nd, Soviet troops reached the camp outside Grunwald, a low sprawl of barracks and mud lanes that had once held factory workers before it held prisoners. The Germans fled before dawn. By noon, Soviet soldiers were in the towers. The Americans cheered until their throats went raw. Keene did not cheer long. He noticed the road first. The road west stayed empty. The road east filled with trucks. A Soviet lieutenant told them they were being moved for medical clearance. 2 days, maybe 3. Be patient. That was the first lie that sounded like administration. They marched east for 4 days. The men told themselves the route must bend around some damaged bridge or contested town. It did not bend. On the 5th morning, they reached a former German transit camp in occupied Poland. The eagle had been ripped from the front office. A red banner hung in its place. The towers were the same. The wire was the same. The locked gate was the same. Only the uniforms had changed. Keene stood in the yard, looking at the new guards, and understood the whole sentence at once. They had not been freed. They had been transferred. The new camp did not look like murder. That made it harder to name. The Soviets gave them soup thin enough to read through. They handed out black bread. A doctor looked at the worst wounds and wrote notes that went nowhere. Nobody lined them up for execution. Nobody beat them for sport. But the gates never opened, and every question received the same soft answer. Soon became 1 week, then 2, then a month. More Americans arrived in batches. Some had been liberated near rail junctions, some near airfields, some near supply roads where Soviet artillery moved west in quantities that stunned men who had already seen a world war. They had seen things. That was the first reason they were kept. The Soviet advance was not only liberating territory, it was arranging a post-war empire. Tank armies were shifting into occupation zones. Airfields were being taken over. Political police were moving faster than diplomats. Supply depots were stacking fuel, ammunition, wire, files, and prisoners in the same landscape. A captured American infantryman might not know the language, but he knew how to read a convoy. He knew the difference between a frontline movement and a permanent garrison. He knew what it meant when artillery parks faced a border that no longer had German soldiers on the other side. And if he went home, he would be debriefed. Every truck count, every bridge position, every rail yard packed with guns, every new prison inside the word liberation. Washington would ask questions. Moscow had no intention of giving Washington the witnesses. The second reason was leverage. The war with Germany was ending, but the peace was still a negotiation with knives under the table. Borders, occupation zones, reparations, ports, governments. Elections that were supposed to be free and were already being designed to come out correctly. At every table, the Soviet delegates understood one rule better than their Western counterparts. A request is stronger when the other side needs something you are withholding. A few thousand Allied prisoners, held quietly, not acknowledged too clearly, not threatened too directly, made excellent leverage. Not hostages, never say hostages, just unresolved personnel, paperwork, processing, a delay with a stamp on it. The third reason was witnesses. In towns across Poland and the Baltic Rim, liberation had begun to carry a second meaning. Local resistance men vanished after meetings. Town officials were replaced before any newspaper could explain why. Families were loaded onto trains at night. Courthouses reopened with new judges and old fear. American prisoners saw pieces of it through barrack windows, convoy slats, and work details. They saw people arrested by their liberators. They saw records burned and new records opened. They saw a new order being built with the speed of men who did not plan to ask permission. If those prisoners reached home while the Alliance still smiled for cameras, their stories would create a problem. The fourth reason was simpler. The man at the center of the Soviet state trusted nobody. Not allies, not defectors, not his own soldiers who had been captured and survived. To him, captivity itself was contamination. Foreign contact was contamination. Witnessing secret movement was contamination. An American soldier who had walked through the rear area of the Red Army was not just a soldier due to be returned. He was a future intelligence report wearing a torn uniform. 4 reasons: intelligence, leverage, witnesses, suspicion. Together they became a policy, not announced, not debated, not written in language history could quote neatly. Just orders moving through security channels, camp commanders, rail officers, border guards, and men with lists. Keep them until further instruction. Keene learned the policy in the only way prisoners ever learn policy: by watching what the guards do when they think nobody is looking. He watched the West Gate. For 18 days no truck left that way. He watched the kitchen. Rations were calculated for long occupancy, not transit. He watched the office. The Soviet clerks made duplicate lists of the Americans, then sealed one copy in red wax and placed it in a courier pouch marked for a security directorate, not the army. That was when Keene stopped waiting for liberation to resume. He started planning to escape. There was a corner of the outer fence where the ground dipped toward a drainage ditch. The tower light swung past it every 27 seconds. The wire was doubled, but the inner strand had been patched with German material and the tie wire was rusted. A mechanic from Kansas found him a broken hacksaw blade hidden in a latrine beam. Keene wrapped it in cloth and worked on the wire every night during the last guard hour, when men got careless because dawn felt too close for trouble. On April 19th, rain came down hard enough to turn the yard into black paste. The tower lamps blurred. The dogs refused to settle. The guards hunched under their coats. Keene crawled through the ditch on his stomach. He cut for 13 minutes, rested for 2, cut again. The wire opened just wide enough to tear skin. He left blood on the lower strand and 3 buttons from his coat in the mud. Then he walked west, not ran. Ran men are hunted. Walking men can become shadows. For 5 nights he moved through fields, barns, shattered villages, and roads where every army in Europe seemed to have left something burning. He ate beets from a cellar and drank ditch water through a sock. On the 6th morning, he saw a white star painted on the hood of a Jeep. He stepped into the road with both hands raised. The driver nearly shot him. Keene gave his name, serial number, unit, and the exact location of the camp. Within hours, he was sitting in a field headquarters under a bare bulb while intelligence officers asked him to repeat the story from the beginning. The first officer wrote fast. The second stopped writing halfway through. The third left the room and came back with a general. Major General Edward Rusk was not the famous kind of commander. He was not theatrical. He did not dress like a cavalry legend. He did not give reporters sentences they could carve into stone. He was an infantryman's general with gray skin, a bad stomach, and the permanent look of a man who had been handed too many maps by people who did not have to cross them. He listened to Keene without interruption. When Keene finished, Rusk asked one question: "How many?" Keene swallowed. "In my camp, sir, maybe 900. But they talked about others." Rusk looked at the intelligence officer. "Others?" The officer opened a folder. They had fragments already, escaped men, rumors from liaison teams, rail reports. A Polish doctor who had counted American dog tags on men moved east. A Soviet captain who drank too much and bragged that the Americans were not leaving until Moscow said they were useful. The fragments had not become a picture until Keene walked out of the mud and put a name to the wire. Rusk spent the next week forcing the picture to exist. Names were collected. Camp locations were marked. Witness accounts were checked against maps and rail schedules. Every rumor had to either harden into evidence or be thrown out. By April 28th, the file contained 3,842 American names believed to be in Soviet hands after liberation from German camps. Not missing in battle, not dead on German rolls, not evacuated west. Alive, according to the last known witnesses. Behind a different wire. Rusk sent the file up the chain with a formal demand for return under the repatriation agreements. The answer came back through diplomatic channels 4 days later. There were no such American prisoners. All liberated Allied personnel had been processed according to agreed procedures. Any confusion was the result of incomplete battlefield records. Rusk read the answer twice. Then he placed it on his desk beside Keene's sworn statement and a hand-drawn map of the camp. One of them was a lie. The map had mud on it. The answer had a seal. That was the difference. Rusk's superiors told him to proceed carefully. They were not cowards. They were not fools. The Pacific War still existed. The alliance still mattered. Millions of displaced people were moving through Europe. A confrontation with the Soviet Union over prisoners could spill into something nobody had planned and nobody could stop. Use channels, they told him. Keep pressure professional. Document everything. Rusk heard all of it. Then he looked again at the list of names. 3,842 names do not fit comfortably inside the phrase diplomatic matter. On May 6th, before dawn, he issued an order that did not cross the line and did not pretend to be accidental. Combat Command B of the 11th Armored moved east. Shermans, tank destroyers, self-propelled guns, infantry and half-tracks, fuel trucks, ambulances, signal jeeps. They traveled in daylight. No camouflage nets, no blackout, no coy routing through forests. Rusk wanted them counted. He wanted every Soviet observation post to file a report before lunch. American armor was concentrating at 3 border crossings near the occupation line. Purpose unknown, posture deliberate. By noon the tanks sat in the open with engines idling and flags visible. The men were ordered not to provoke and not to retreat. No crossing, no firing, no threats. Just presence. That was the message. Diplomatic letters cost nothing to ignore. Tanks on the horizon cost attention. The Soviet commander opposite Rusk was Marshal Alexei Morozov, a hard, intelligent man who had survived the road from Kursk to Berlin by treating optimism as a battlefield disease. He knew a bluff when he saw one. He also knew this was not only a bluff. American armor did not appear by accident. If Rusk had moved without authorization, he was dangerous. If Washington had allowed him to move, the problem was larger. Either way, the prisoners had become expensive. Morozov called the Allied liaison office and asked for clarification. Rusk took the call himself. "Your tanks are too close to our zone," Morozov said. "Your camps are too full of our men," Rusk replied. "We hold no American prisoners. I have names. Names can be wrong. I have escaped witnesses. Men lie when frightened. I have camp locations." A pause came over the line. Then Morozov said, "Perhaps the matter requires review." Rusk looked through the window at the tanks lined against the pale German morning. "Review quickly." For the first time in weeks, something changed inside the camps. The guards grew careful. Officers arrived with sealed envelopes. Men who had been told nothing for months were suddenly ordered to pack. Nobody explained why. The prisoners did not need an explanation. They could hear artillery drills in the distance. American guns had a sound they knew in their bones. On May 11th, the first group came west. 142 men at a crossing near a blown railway bridge. They were thin, unshaven, and silent at first, as if noise might send them back. General Rusk stood at the line and watched them step out of Soviet trucks, not as a parade, not as an event, as an accounting. He shook hands until his shoulder hurt. A corporal from Nebraska gripped him with both hands and said, "Sir, we thought nobody knew." Rusk answered, "We knew once one of you got out." Over the next 10 days, releases continued. 200 here, 400 there. Names crossed off the list in pencil because Rusk refused to use ink until every man was physically seen by American medics. By May 24th, 3,611 Americans had been returned. Then the releases stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The Soviet answer hardened again. All prisoners and military records had been returned. Remaining American claims were unsupported. Any missing men had died in German custody, escaped independently, deserted, or been misidentified. Rusk knew what that meant. The men left were no longer in military camps. They had been moved out of the category prisoner of war and into the category problem. His intelligence officer, Major Helen Markham, found the thread. She had spent the war building truth out of scraps. Rail timings, intercepted messages, supply manifests, witness statements. Stamps on the wrong paper. Now she found 73 Americans who had vanished from regular camp rolls and reappeared only as initials in security transport logs. They were not under the Soviet army anymore. They were under the political police, held at 3 facilities built from former German prisons and factories. The largest was an old glassworks near Borova, 30 miles inside the Soviet zone. It held 47 Americans, not because they were leverage, because they had seen too much. They had passed near a Soviet armored concentration, watched rail unloadings, and seen arrests of local resistance leaders around a town the new authorities were already calling stabilized. The Soviets would never admit the glassworks existed, and a prisoner who officially did not exist could be kept forever. Rusk took the evidence to his superiors. The answer came back clean and firm. No unauthorized operations, no entry into Soviet-controlled territory, no action that could endanger the occupation settlement. Rusk did not argue. He saluted. Then he walked back to his office and closed the door. Major Markham was waiting. She knew his face well enough to know the order had failed. "How many men can we use?" Rusk asked. "For what, sir?" "For something that will not have a name." Markham did not smile. 20, maybe. Men who can move quietly. Men who understand that if they are caught, no flag will come for them. Rusk looked at the map of Borova. "Find them." The operation was built without paper, no typed orders. No unit designations, no medals imagined in advance, no official plan that could survive a filing cabinet. They called it Lantern, not because it was dramatic, but because Markham said a lantern is what you carry when the road is ugly and you refuse to call the dark normal. 22 volunteers met in a maintenance hangar on May 31st. Rangers, engineers, 2 former OSS men, a Polish-speaking medic from Chicago, a radio operator who could repair a set with wire and a pocket knife. Rusk told them the truth. 47 Americans were being held inside a security facility that did not exist on any diplomatic record. The government had ordered no action. If the mission failed, they would be denied. If they died, their families would be given an explanation shaped to protect a peace conference none of them had been invited to attend. They could walk out now. No shame, no punishment, no questions. Nobody moved. That was the moment the operation became real. Lantern crossed the line just after midnight on June 3rd. The first team cut telephone lines 8 miles from Borova and set fire to an empty fuel shed used by a Soviet transport unit. The damage looked sloppy on purpose. Partisan work, local anger, bad luck, the kind of mess that pulls guards outward. The second team moved toward the glassworks through a drainage canal that smelled of oil, lime, and dead weeds. The facility was surrounded by 2 fences and watched by 4 towers, but factories have habits prisons do not. They have service doors, cinder piles, broken loading bays, old ventilation routes nobody respects until men with knives and fear crawl through them. At 2:17 in the morning, the power failed in the east wing. Not long, 40 seconds. Enough. The team crossed the yard under darkness and entered through a cracked furnace shed. Inside, the air still carried the ghost of hot glass. The Americans were held in a storage hall where wooden crates had once carried window panes. 47 men. Some could stand, some could not. All of them understood English before they trusted hope. Captain Elias Ward, the ranger leading the inside team, opened the door and said 6 words. "We are leaving through the furnace." For 2 seconds, nobody moved. Then one prisoner began to laugh, not because it was funny, because his mind had no other place to put the fact that the impossible had opened a door. They moved fast, too fast for quiet. A guard turned the corner near the loading hall and shouted. Ward fired once. The shout became an alarm anyway. Lights snapped on. Boots pounded through corridors. A siren started and died halfway through because the cut telephone line had confused the emergency circuit. The prisoners ran through the furnace shed, coughing in the lime dust. 2 men fell. The medic grabbed one. A sapper carried the other across his shoulders like a sack. Outside, the extraction trucks waited under tarps marked with forged Soviet transport numbers. The first truck took 28 men. The second took the rest and 3 wounded. By the time the convoy reached the West Road, pursuit had formed behind it. 2 Soviet trucks with headlights blacked out, then a third. Lantern's first team was waiting at a culvert where the road narrowed between drainage ditches. They did not try to win a battle. They bought minutes. A burst into the lead engine. Smoke. Shouting. Confusion. A tree dropped across the road with demolition cord. The pursuit stopped long enough to argue with itself. That was all the time the convoy needed. At dawn, the trucks reached the American line. General Rusk was there, not in front of cameras. There were no cameras, only medics, blankets, coffee, and men, stepping down from a vehicle into a country that had nearly misplaced them. Captain Ward gave Rusk the count. 47 recovered, 3 wounded, no prisoners left behind. Rusk nodded once. Then he walked to the men from Borova. One of them, a lieutenant named Samuel Price, tried to salute and could not raise his arm high enough. Rusk returned the salute anyway. "Lieutenant," he said, "welcome back." Price looked at the line behind him. "Sir, did they know?" Rusk understood the question. Did Washington know? Did the Army know? Did his family know? Did the promise know? Rusk said, "Some knew enough to wait, some knew enough to argue, we knew enough to come." That was the only answer he had. The Soviet protest arrived 48 hours later. American forces had violated Soviet territory. Soviet personnel had been killed. A state security facility had been attacked. This was aggression. The official American reply was polished smooth. No American unit had crossed the occupation line. No sanctioned operation had taken place. If missing prisoners had escaped Soviet custody, that reflected their courage and the confusion of post-war conditions. Both sides understood the sentence. Some things would happen. Nobody would confirm them. Everybody would adjust. The remaining prisoners on Rusk's list came out slowly over the summer. Not all of them. Some names stayed names. 12 were later reported dead of illness in places their families had never heard of. 7 vanished into clerical darkness. 5 were returned through channels so quiet that their own records listed only. Recovered from Eastern custody. Origin unspecified. Rusk kept the armored command at the line until the last official release had crossed. Then and only then he ordered the tanks back. For this he was not celebrated. Men who embarrass governments rarely are. He was reassigned before autumn to a historical records board, where his job was to summarize campaigns that other men were still allowed to command. He wrote his reports. He answered letters from families. He sent private copies of names to people who had been told by officers that there were no names to send. He did not give speeches about honor. Honor, he once wrote in a letter he never mailed, is a word people use when the invoice has been paid by somebody else. Daniel Keene went home to Pittsburgh after months in hospitals and debriefing rooms. He worked in a machine shop, married a school secretary named Ruth, kept a notebook in a locked drawer for 40 years. On the first page he had written the thing he could not stop seeing. The same wire, different flag. He did not teach his children to hate the men in the towers. That was not the lesson he brought home. The lesson was colder. A uniform does not make a promise true. A signature does not make a promise safe. A process does not become moral because it has a stamp. Years later, when old files began to open and old men began to die with less fear of what they were allowed to say, parts of the story surfaced. Not cleanly, never cleanly. A list here. A transport log there. A medical form with the wrong camp name. A family letter answered 50 years too late. History rarely returns the missing whole. It returns them in fragments and asks the living to assemble the shame. The official books kept the war tidy for as long as they could. Liberation, victory, alliance, peace. Those words were not false. They were incomplete, because at the edge of that victory, behind wire that had changed hands but not meaning, men waited for the promise written about them to become stronger than the convenience of forgetting them. Most institutions chose patience. Patience was polite. Patience was careful. Patience protected the table where the new world was being negotiated. But prisoners do not live at negotiation tables. They live in barracks, in mud, under guard towers, inside the distance between soon and never. General Rusk did not save everyone. That matters. The story should not be cleaned until failure disappears. Some men did not come home. Some came home too damaged to explain where they had been. Some families received answers only after the people who needed them were already buried. But thousands crossed back because one escaped sergeant made the hidden wire visible, and one general decided a promise was not allowed to die of paperwork. The war ended when the guns went quiet. The promise survived only because someone made betrayal expensive.